Hey, it's nice to see you again. Welcome to Planet Eureka and New York State questions. Now we're at the point where we need to talk about Eureka and New York State questions. Well, here's what you should ask yourself. How can I embed past New York State exam questions into a Eureka lesson? Hmm, the first thing is I can embed them within the opening of the lesson or exit ticket. We spoke about that on Planet Spiral Review. Another way to answer the question could be when customizing my lesson, I can embed in a question or two as a must do problem or problems when applicable. We will take a deeper look at this as we proceed. What you see here are two possible lesson formats. The lesson format on the left is for one teaching period. The lesson format on the right are for two teaching periods. You will see these in a bigger view as I proceed. So let's look at the lesson format on the left for one teaching period. I will walk you through this possible lesson format for one teaching period, which will bring us back to Spiral Review and lead us into how to embed past New York State exam questions into a Eureka lesson. First, let's begin with the grace period. We want to allow students 2 minutes max to log on with their materials. Keep in mind, if we keep waiting for students, students will continue to come late. So please make sure that you set that expectation in your class. Moving right along to Spiral Review. You want to allow 10 minutes max for the Spiral Review, especially when you have a class for a single period. So here's how you can do that. Incorporate one past New York State exam question using a Google form in lieu of our do now, opening exercise, or fluency activities on a daily basis, especially at this point in the year. Also, you want to ensure that your Spiral Review should be no longer than 10 minutes. Remember, we're saying no longer than 10 minutes because this is one teaching period. The 10 minutes should be a combination of time for students to work on the problem and time for us to review the problem. So you can allow students approximately 3 minutes to work on the problem and submit their answer, and then the remaining 7 minutes you can review. Also, please do the problem prior to using them and identify misconceptions which may arise. Be prepared to ask students questions to support thinking. Do a quick error analysis to address the distractors. This is an opportunity to go over test taking strategies. And as discussed on Plan Inspire Review, you were able to see review plans with some suggestions regarding the standards to review and the questions you could use. Let's move right along to student outcomes. You want to be able to explain to students what they're going to be learning in a lesson, but you don't want that to maximize your time. So give yourself a maximum of 3 minutes to do that. Summarize the student outcome or outcomes and provide visuals when possible to support their thinking. Let's see what I mean by that. So this is grade 6, module 2, lesson 9. As you can see, the student outcomes was summarized, but I did not take away the vocabulary within the outcomes. But here's how we can assist students. Students will be able to relate decimals and mixed numbers. So I just showed them a visual of a mixed number and decimal. Round the addends, minuends, and subtrahends to predict reasonable answers. Students will get caught up in these words. Why not provide them a visual of what that may look like in an equation that they're very familiar with? Solve real world problems by finding the sums and differences with or without estimation. So what I'm doing here is providing a visual of what estimation will look like for this particular lesson. Here's another sample, grade 6, module 3, lesson 17. Aim. We can draw coordinate planes. I'm providing a visual of what a coordinate plane is. Locate, graph, and label ordered pairs, providing a visual of ordered pairs. Make reasonable choices for scaling of the x-axis and y-axis. So what I'm doing here is providing them with an example of what scaling would basically involve. Think about skip counting. Here's a sample for grade 7, module 2, lesson 14. Aim. We will be able to convert all rational numbers to decimals. So I'm already explaining to students that convert means I'm going to change. Rational numbers, I'm providing them again with what rational numbers look like. Use long division to represent fractions as decimals that terminate or repeat using the repeated bar. So here I'm underlining terminate and telling them that that means it's going to end or stop. And down here, I'm providing students with the visual of fractions and the equivalent decimal counterparts, where it's terminating and repeating. Finally, we have an example for grade 8, module 4, lesson 15. Students will be able to identify the slope as a number that describes the steepness or slant of a line. So I provided a visual of a real life situation in which students can relate to the word steepness, thinking about hills. So I'm showing them an increasing one, decreasing one, and an increasing one again. Interpret the unit rate as the slope of a graph. So here I'm just quickly reminding students what unit rates are and what they could look like. Let's go back to our lesson format. Let's move right along to explicit teacher modeling. This should be a maximum of 10 minutes. What you want to do is strategically plan what example or examples you will explicitly model for the lesson to support the student outcomes. Ensure that your explicit modeling is neat, includes visuals with labels to support your thinking out loud and process, includes scaffolds, includes various math representations when relevant, and it produces an anchor chart for students to reference later on. Be sure to list vocabulary. So this is something that I did in the videos that you've watched as you navigated through the obstacles in space. Let's move down to student work time. Remember, this is still one teaching period, so you want to give at least 10 minutes. When customizing your lesson, decide the must do, could do, and challenge problems, as you usually do, and strategically choose 2 to 4 problems, depending on how heavy they are. Some of the problems are very heavy. Choose them from the exercises and or problem sets for students to engage in independently, in peers, in groups, or a combination of all. That's entirely up to you. Now, I have in bold and purple, embed 1 or 2 past New York State exam questions into the student work time when applicable, which will result in you replacing 1 or 2 of the Eureka problems, preferably the must-dos. Do not add on additional problems. And I'm putting this in bold because if we're choosing 2 to 4 problems and we now want to embed New York State exam questions in, you don't want to put that on top of those problems. So let it replace the must-dos. And I specifically say the must-dos because the must-dos should be the problem that everyone has an opportunity to attempt, and you want everyone to have the opportunity to attempt those past state exam questions when applicable. So I'm going to click here to see the important details or information about when applicable. But before I do, I want you to be sure to set expectations for your students and their work product when they are working independently or with their peers. And be sure to circulate to support students and push their thinking while taking notes of students' work. Let's see what I mean by when applicable. What do I mean by when applicable? Now, this is where we start really thinking about how can we embed or when should we embed past New York State exam questions within a lesson. Well, within the Eureka curriculum or other curricula, it often takes several lessons to build the knowledge needed to be proficient within a standard. As a result, we do not, I repeat, we do not want to embed a past state exam question into our current lessons as a must do problem or problems or exit ticket prematurely. However, the reason we want to embed it is because we will not have time to spiral back to expose students to the past state exam questions pertaining to the current standards being taught. Therefore, we must look at the lessons carefully and plan strategically. Here are some examples. Let's start with sixth grade, Module 4. When we reach the following lessons, you want to incorporate past state exam questions into the must do and exit ticket in a Google form. Let's look at this. So for lesson 21, you can include a 6EE2 past New York State question or questions. Then when you reach to lesson 26, you can include questions for 6EE6 and 6EE7 from past New York State exam questions. Notice lessons 22, 23, 24, and 25 are not here. Why? Because those lessons are in support of building knowledge for 6EE6 and 6EE7. As you move along to lesson 27, you can include questions for 6EE6 and 6EE7 again. As you move along, we reach to lesson 31. At this point in time, you can include questions from the past state exams for standard 6EE9. Then we move along to lesson 33 and 34, and that's when you can include questions for 6EE8, etc. Let's move on to grade 7. Seventh grade, module 4. Same process. I'll just go through it. Lesson 4, include 7RP3 questions specifically for percent increase and percent decrease. Then when you reach to lesson 5, you can include past New York State exam questions for 7RP3, but ensuring that those questions are geared towards finding the whole, given the percent and part. So you have to do a little work there. Lesson 7, you can include questions for 7RP3 again, but ensure that these questions are specifically addressing discount, markdown, tax, and markup. For lesson 8, again, you can include questions for 7RP3, but ensure that these questions are geared towards percent error or percent increase and decrease. For lesson 10, you can include another 7RP3 question, but you want to make sure that this question addresses simple interest, etc. Let's move right along to grade 8. So grade 8, module 5, same thought process, and I'll just go through it. For lesson 2, you can include a question for 8F1. Notice I didn't say anything about lesson 1. For lesson 6, you can include a question that represents 8F3 from the past state exam, but for tables only. And notice I did not mention lesson 3, 4, and 5 because that is a buildup to get to 8F3. Lesson 7, you can include questions for 8F2 from the past New York State exam. And for lesson 8, you can come back and include questions for 8F3, but you want to ensure that these questions are representing equations. And there's one more thing I would like to bring to your attention. I just went through how to embed past New York State exam questions into a Eureka lesson. For each of those examples I shared, it just so happened that those standards are in the major cluster for sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. But I want you to keep in mind that when you are teaching upcoming lessons that are from the supporting and additional clusters, which you'll see here in blue and yellow, that you still must teach those lessons and still embed past state exam questions when applicable. The standards may not be major, but they are still important and students will be held accountable. Also, please note, some standards have the word post next to it, which you'll see over here on the right. That just simply means that these standards are to be taught after the state exam, not before, but after. So if you come across any lessons while you're teaching that addresses those standards, please skip them for now. And after the state exam, you'll come back to these lessons and you'll teach them in their entirety because they are important for the next grade. So you're looking at eighth grade right now. Please understand that there are post standards on sixth grade and post standards for seventh grade. I hope that was helpful in explaining to you how and when you can include past New York State exam questions. Let's move right along. Class discussion of tasks, or shall I say problems, and summary or debrief of the lesson. That should be approximately 7 minutes. You want to make sure that you use your notes strategically to determine which problems you want to review and which students you want to present. You can also use this opportunity to quickly lift important points. Facilitate a summary of the discussion as well, and write down what students say and display it to them. And finally, let's move to the exit ticket. You want to ensure that you administer an exit ticket so that you can see what students actually understood about the lesson. Remember, you can also customize the exit ticket when needed. Now let's go back. Now we're just going to take a couple of minutes to explore the lesson format for 2 teaching periods. So here is the lesson format for 2 teaching periods. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's very similar to the lesson format for 1 teaching period. I will, however, lift some things. The first thing I'm going to speak about is the spiral review. You'll notice I allocated more time for the spiral review, 30 minutes. And because of that, you should be able to incorporate 2 to 3 past New York State exam questions. So think about your timing and determine how long you want your students to work on the problems, and then allow time for you to go over each of the problems. Give or take 3 minutes per problem for students to answer. Student outcomes, same thought process. Explicit teacher modeling, I left it exactly the same. An increased time doesn't mean that you model more. You still want to stick to your explicit modeling time. However, the student work time has increased to 25 minutes. Because you have 2 teaching periods, it will be great if students can engage with the math for a longer period of time. I will bring your attention to the fact that I have changed the amount of problems that you should allow students to work on from 2 to 4 problems to 3 to 5 problems. However, when you embed in past New York State exam questions, the same process applies. Class discussion of task and summary debrief of the lesson has increased to 15 minutes because there are more problems that you assign students, so you want to give a little bit more time. And remember, if you're embedding in past New York State exam questions, you want to ensure that during that class discussion of tasks, those questions you want to review. And then, of course, your exit ticket. So you can give them more time for the exit ticket, or like we discussed on Plan Inspire Review, you can give them their exit ticket a little early. And if it includes a past New York State exam question, you can then go over it before that class is over. So let us proceed. We have reached the end of our journey, and I just wanted to go back to the session goals to see if I've actually met these goals, and I'm hoping that I did. The first goal was to support participants on how to engage in Aspire review of previously taught standards while collecting data and providing students with explicit models without impeding on the time needed to continue teaching current lessons. That's the reason for the lesson format. And then also, as you navigated through the obstacles, I provided examples of how you can explicitly model these problems. The second goal was to support participants in embedding New York State exam questions into a Eureka lesson. So that's when I referenced the when applicable, where I went through samples for grade 6, grade 7, and grade 8 and suggested where you can plug in those past New York State exam questions into certain lessons. And now the session objectives. So I do hope that you all feel that the objectives were met and that you can walk away knowing how to intentionally plan lessons with opportunities for students to engage in Aspire review of previously taught standards, and that you intentionally plan lessons with embedded New York State exam questions to expose students to state expectations while maintaining the integrity of the Eureka curriculum. I hope each and every one of you feel comfortable doing this and will immediately incorporate these ideas, as well as make this a year-long practice starting at the beginning of the next school year, September 2021. I see you back in space.